The night of December 24, 1945, seemed like any other Christmas Eve for the Sodder family in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jenny Sodder, along with their 10 children, had just finished their Christmas celebration and were preparing for bed. The house, which had been a lively gathering place throughout the evening, was finally quieting down. But what happened next would leave a haunting mark on the family's history and spark a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. The disappearance of 5 of the Sodder children in the middle of the night. A fire that didn't add up. It all started with a fire that engulfed the Sodder family home. The fire broke out around 1 o'clock a.m., just hours after the children had gone to bed. The fire quickly spread through the 2-story home, forcing George and Jenny to escape with their other children. However, 5 of the Sodder children, Martha, Louie, Maurice, Jenny, and Betty, were still inside the house, or so it seemed. But this was no ordinary fire. When the fire department arrived the following morning, they found no trace of the missing children. The house had burned down to its foundation, but inexplicably, there were no remains of the children. Firefighters, after inspecting the ruins, determined that the fire had caused extensive damage, but there was no indication that the children had perished in the flames. What baffled George and Jenny the most was the apparent lack of any evidence of the children inside the house. The fire department's report stated that the fire had been fierce, but there should have been some remnants of their bodies. The absence of any bones or remains led many to believe that the children had somehow escaped the fire, or worse, been taken. But the facts surrounding their disappearance would only get stranger as the investigation unfolded. The oddities that didn't make sense. In the immediate aftermath of the fire, George and Jenny conducted their own investigation into what had happened that fateful night. They discovered several things that didn't add up. First, they noticed that the family's phone line had been cut. On the night of the fire, a telephone repairman had passed by the Sodder house and noticed that the phone line was in good condition, but somehow it had been severed before the fire started. This raised suspicions that someone might have intentionally sabotaged their phone line to prevent the family from calling for help during the emergency. Additionally, George found a burned-up ladder near the back of the house. The ladder was supposed to be kept in a shed, but for some reason, it had been moved to the house's exterior, leaning against the wall. It appeared that someone had placed it there deliberately, suggesting that the missing children could have climbed out of the window to escape the fire, if they had been able to do so. The most troubling discovery, however, came when George and Jenny discovered that the fire itself seemed to have been odd. The fire had burned intensely at some points, while other parts of the house had remained untouched. Some of the family's furniture, like the kitchen stove, was completely unscathed, while the rest of the house was destroyed. Fire experts who examined the scene later could not explain the unusual behavior of the flames. The suspicious phone calls. As the investigation into the fire and the disappearance of the Sodder children continued, a series of unsettling phone calls began to emerge. Several days after the fire, Jenny received a strange phone call from someone who claimed to have information about the children. The voice on the other end of the line seemed to be male, but it was heavily distorted, making it difficult to understand. The caller mentioned that the children had been taken by a group of men who did not offer any further explanation. The strange call was just one of several odd phone interactions that the family experienced during this time. In the months that followed, the Sodders would continue to receive mysterious phone calls, some of which came from people claiming to have seen the missing children alive. These calls only deepened the mystery, but they also fueled the growing suspicion that the children had been abducted, not killed in the fire, the investigation, and the lack of evidence. Despite the many oddities and strange occurrences surrounding the fire, law enforcement was unable to find any solid evidence to support the Sodders' theory that their children had survived. The local police conducted a thorough investigation into the fire, but their efforts yielded no clues about the children's whereabouts. Fire investigators dismissed the possibility of arson, and they suggested that the fire was an accident, likely caused by a faulty wire or some other electrical issue. However, George and Jenny were unconvinced by the official conclusion. They believed that someone had deliberately set the fire and taken their children. They continued to seek out their own leads, even hiring private investigators and following up on tips from strangers who claimed to know something about the missing children. When a woman claimed to have seen the children at a nearby diner just days after the fire. She described the children as being in the company of a man and a woman, both of whom were strangers to her. The woman told police that the children appeared to be well-fed and healthy, contradicting the theory that they had perished in the flames. Unfortunately, this lead went nowhere, as the individuals in question were never identified. The Sodder family's continued search. Over the years, the Sodder family's search for their missing children continued, but no answers came. George and Jenny became obsessed with the idea that their children had been taken, possibly by a group of kidnappers or even as part of some kind of vendetta against the family. In the 1950s, they put up a billboard near their home with pictures of the missing children, hoping to generate new tips or information. As the years went on, the Sodders never gave up hope that their children might still be alive. In fact, the couple was so convinced that their children had survived the fire that they even hired a psychic to help with their investigation. The psychic told the family that their children were alive, and though the information was unsubstantiated, it gave them a glimmer of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. The Sodders' search for answers would not end until George's death in 1969. Jenny continued to search for her children for many more years, and she even added additional details to the family's billboard in the hopes of drawing new attention to the case. Unfortunately, no new clues ever emerged, and the mystery surrounding the disappearance of the Sodder children was never solved. Theories and speculations. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed about the fate of the Sodder children. Some believe that the fire was an accident and that the children simply perished in the flames, but there is little evidence to support this theory. The lack of remains, the strange behavior of the fire, and the mysterious phone calls point to something much more sinister. One popular theory is that the children were abducted by a group of criminals who had a grudge against the Sodder family. Some have suggested that the family's business dealings and George's outspoken political views made them enemies, but no solid evidence has been found to support this idea. Another theory is that the children were kidnapped and sold into a child trafficking ring, though this remains speculative. The unsolved mystery. To this day, the mystery of the Sodder children's disappearance remains unsolved. While many believe the children were taken, there is no concrete evidence to confirm their fate. The case has inspired numerous investigations, documentaries, and articles, but the question of what happened that night in 1945 continues to elude us. The story of the Sodder family is one of tragedy, persistence, and a search for answers that, despite all efforts, remains elusive. The Sodders never gave up hope, and Jenny, in particular, continued to search for the truth until her death in 1989. Although the fire may have been nearly 80 years ago, the haunting mystery of the Sodder children continues to captivate people around the world. If you found this story intriguing, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more mysteries and unsolved cases. Your support helps us bring more in-depth investigations into these captivating stories, and we truly appreciate you being part of our community.